Hi everyone, this is Piyush. So now UPSC CSC Prelims 2024 is about to come. और जैसे जैसे यूपीएससी का प्रीलिम्स पास आता जा रहा है वैसे वैसे दिल की धड़कनें जो है वो बढ़ती जा रही है और बढ़ने के पीछे लॉजिक बहुत सिंपल है कि ऑफ कोर्स इन लास्ट फ्यू इयर्स वन पैटर्न कैन बी डेफिनेटली नोटिस दैट प्री इज बिकमिंग टफर एंड टफर. Why it's becoming tougher? Because the nature of the questions are as such which cannot be solved through a normal study, right? So the way you have studied all these topics and the questions are being asked from the generic themes and then they could be attempted, and probably this is what making the things very complicated. But of course, as a repercussion, you can see that the cutoff is also getting drastically down. But this does not mean that you can depend on this reducing cutoff. Rather, you have to prepare yourself in such a way that your marks should be as such that after giving the prelims, at least you are becoming confident enough that definitely I am going to clear the pre-examination, and that you can focus more on the mains examination. Because after the prelims, if you have been waiting for a couple of days for the result to come, in that case you have been wasting around 3 weeks, and that is not going in favor of yours. That's the reason because of what the last minute revision is very important, and in this last minute revision you should basically focus on those areas from where regularly the questions are being asked. There are certain topics that you can note down in pre-examination that questions are repeatedly being asked from there. So whenever it comes to the last minute revision, so there you should focus on these kind of topics. And one thing that to be noted very precisely, that you cannot focus on the generic content, the content from where the questions are not being asked, such as let's take the example of Buddhism as a topic. Now Buddhism is a very important topic, and every year the questions are being asked from Buddhism, but then they are not asking the questions from very generic theme. Rather, they have been asking from some deeper dimensions of the topic, and that's why when you have been revising this content, at the end you should focus more on these dimensions rather than on the general themes or the general content. So what we are going to do in the last moment revision, I am just trying to help you out, and we will be picking up certain topics and we'll be discussing about all those dimensions from where the questions are quite possible or they may be asked. So that's how we were going to start it with Buddhism. Now you all must have realized one thing, that Buddhism is a very important theme, and in fact regularly questions are being asked from Buddhism, and that's the reason because of what we have decided to start it with a Buddhism, right? So it will be a quick revision, it's a quick lecture, and in fact we are not going to discuss a lot about Buddhism and Jainism, Buddhism and Jainism, rather we'll be just focusing on those dimensions from where the questions are probable, right? So when it comes to Buddhism or let's say Jainism, here we are just precisely going to discuss about Buddhism only. So when it comes to Buddhism or Jainism, you all know that somewhere in 6th and 5th century BC, there was a sort of larger movement or let's say revolution also, that could be noticed. Now why did it emerge? That's a very general idea that probably the Brahmanism was having so much problems. The way you can find that the Brahmanism or there was increasing dominance of Brahmanism, then you find that Varna system had become very strict. Apart from that, society has come to that particular stage where they could generate great amount of surplus, and this surplus could have supported the rise of these kind of movements, specifically in another non-productive class. So there are multiple reasons because of what ultimately Buddhism and Jainism are appearing as a sort of larger movement during this particular period, right? But when it comes to the UPSC examination, there are certain very different dimensions which are being asked. So let's focus on that, and we will be cutting the details which are general, and in fact I believe that everybody must be knowing these kind of things. So let's focus on that. When it comes to Buddhism and Jainism, so some basic details are there, okay? Like that person was from a place that's called as Kapilvastu. So Kapilvastu, which clan he was coming from? It was the Sakya clan, right? His mother was called as Mahamaya or Maya Devi. That's the name of his mother. The childhood name of this person was Siddharth, and this person was after the death of his mother, this person was raised, Mahatma Buddha was raised by Prajapati Gautami. Later on he was married at the age of 16, he was married with Yasodhara, and with Yasodhara he had a son also, that's called as Rahul. Now this person since beginning had like interest in some sort of spiritualism, or like he had some sort of questions in his mind, and he was continuously thinking about these kind of questions. And it is believed that after like experiencing all these three like things, like when he saw an old man, then like a sick person, then a deceased, like and finally the blessed saint. So after seeing all these, he had realized ki, like he needs to figure out that what is the reality of this life, or what is the like final truth, the final reality of this life. And that's how he is leaving home, and like he is leaving home, and then he started looking for the real truth. Right? So at the age of 29, years, he has left that person left home, and his home leaving, right, is known as Mahabhiniskriman. That's a very important point. His home leaving is known as Mahabhiniskriman, right? So when he left home, and as I told you, it is also known as the great going forth or the great departure, these kind of different names that have been used for it to indicate about it, right? So once he left home, after that he started approaching couple of Brahmins. Why? Because he believed that the Brahmins are having all these knowledge, and that's why he had been appealing to approaching to some of the Brahmins in order to understand this reality. There are two important fellows who were approached by him. One is Alar Kalam. So in the initial period, he was like this person was a Brahmin. Buddha approached him, and when he was not satisfied, then he like approached another person, that's called as Rudrak Ramputta. So these are two Brahmin fellows. They were approached by Buddha. There were total 5 in number, but unfortunately Buddha was not satisfied with their answers, and that's the reason because of what he decided to figure out the truth or the reality by his own, and that's why he went for this meditation. And finally it is believed that this person is getting enlightenment after couple of years, and it happened in which place? That's the Bodh Gaya. And it was a Baisakh Purnima, it was the night of Baisakh Purnima. So after a rigorous meditation of 6 years, that person is attaining the Buddhahood. Now what is the meaning of Buddhahood? That person got enlightened. He has understood the reality of everything, and that's why this person is called as Buddha. So everybody in Buddhism who is attaining this particular state now is known as Buddha. So Buddha, it's not necessarily that this is applied to like Gautam Buddha. Anybody who is attaining this particular status is known as Buddha. Fine. And after that, like once he attained this, like there are certain other names had been also used for him, such as Tathagat and then Sakya Muni. So after getting enlightenment, this person was known as either Buddha or Tathagat or Sakya Muni. Again I am repeating, Buddha, Tathagat and Sakya Muni. These are 3 terms that you need to keep in mind. Okay, fine. Let's move to the next one. Okay, fine. So once he attained the nirvana, this is what called as nirvana in Buddhism, and I'll come to that part later on. So after that, he just came up with his philosophy. And what philosophy, like he had the philosophy of, let's say, the Chatur Arya Satyani. That is one important theme of his philosophy, and the second is the Eightfold Path. These are 2 core concepts of his philosophy. Repeating it once again, Chatur Arya Satyani, and this next one is Eightfold Path. These are interlinked, and you'll be able to understand the interlinkages after this. Once he attained this enlightenment, after that he decided to convey this idea, his philosophy, his knowledge to other people also. And this process was ultimately started from the place called as Sarnath, that's also called as Risipatan. It was called as Risipatan during those days. So यहाँ से उन्होंने अपने जो sermons है उसको शुरू किया, and this particular like incident when he is giving his sermon for the first time is known as Dharma Chakra Pravartan. ठीक है, is known as Dharma Chakra Pravartan. मतलब it is turning the wheel of the like dharma. That's why it's being called as Dharma Chakra Pravartan. What I hope you remember the last one. The first important incident I told you, Mahabhiniskriman, when he is leaving home, and the second is Dharma Chakra Pravartan. That is like when he is giving his first sermon at what place? It was Sarnath, and the older name of this particular place was Risipatan, right? Okay. Hereafter that person is established like 2 different sanghas, one for the monks, one for the nuns. So bhikkhus, right, and for bhikkhunis he had established like 2 important two important sanghas. and it is believed that after the request of his mother, foster mother, this person decided to give entry he decided to give entry to women to his Sangha, and it was quite a radical decision which was made by Gautam Buddha, right? And finally at the age of 80, this person dies at Kusinagar, right? So this is the last important incident, and that is this particular incident is known as Mahaparinirvana. So in Buddha's life, there are a couple of things which are very important, and what are the things? I'm repeating it once again. The first is his birth, the second is womb living, that's Mahabhinishraman. The third is basically his enlightenment. Which is known as Nirvana, then first sermon, that's Dharmachakra Pravartan, and then finally his death, which is known as Mahaparinirvana. Okay, fine. Let's move to the next one. Okay, fine. So this is these are the things we have already discussed. Now let's discuss about some of the important parts of his philosophy. So what did I tell you? That there are two important aspects in his religion. The first, which is called as Chatur Arya Satyani. So this four noble truth is also called as Chatur Arya Satyani. That is four noble truth. What are these important aspects of his four noble truth? The first term is dukkha. You need to remember these kind of terms. Dukkha is basically the main cause of the suffering. So according to him, it's sometimes believed as a pessimistic philosophy also. Why? Because dukkha was in his core of his philosophy, and he believed that dukkha is something which is permanent in nature, whether happiness or sukh is something which is impermanent in nature. That's why he was trying to address the most important question in human life, that is dukkha. Why? Because it is permanent in nature. So this is also known as the law of impermanence, right? What is this law of impermanence? When you talk about the happiness, right? When you talk about the happiness, so basically this is something which is known as the law of impermanence, right? Something which is real. According to him, everything which makes you happy is ultimately impermanent, and something which is permanent in nature is dukkha, right? The next he is talking about that there is a cause of suffering, that is called as samudaya. This term is again very important. What is samudaya? There is a cause of suffering. So you are not facing this dukkha without any reason, rather the reason is there, right? And then there is a cessation of these sufferings, right? Achha, what is the most important thing discussed by him as the reason for this dukkha? So basically he talks about the trishna, desire, as the most important reason. Though he had been discussing about some other things also, such as desire is there, jealousy is there, I-ness is there. I-ness matlab that aham, that ego wala thing is called as I-ness, right? So but then the most important reason was discussed by him as the trishna or the desire, and he says we are suffering. Why? Because of our desire. Okay, fine. So then he talks about the nirodh. What is nirodh? That is the solution, right? So dukh, samudaya, and the third is nirodh. He is simply saying that there is a solution of this also. And what is the solution? Then he talks about the eightfold path. That is the second part of his philosophy, where he is talking about the eightfold path, right? What are these eightfold path? This is also known as Ashtangika Marg. Okay, eightfold path, and these are right view, right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and finally right concentration, right? Mind you, these are divided into two parts. What are these two parts? In Buddhism, there is a precise philosophy, there was a philosophy, and this philosophy divides the followers into two branches, right? Or two sections. One section is monks, and the second is the lay followers, that's also known as laity. मतलब जो लोग हाउसहोल्ड लीड करते हुए भी बुद्धिज्म को फॉलो कर रहे थे, they were known as laity, and those who had left everything in order to follow Buddhism, they are known as monks. Like when it comes to monks, they were supposed to, like all eight. When it comes to the laities, they were supposed to follow the first four only. So just by following the first four, the people could get the nirvana, attain the nirvana. That was like the Buddhist idea. Okay. Now, in Buddhist philosophy, there are some very important terms. Unfortunately, it's not being focused by you. There is a word that's called as paticca samuppada. Okay? It's a very important philosophy, the paticca samuppada, and that is called as the law of dependence. Okay? So dependent origination, like these are various terms that have been used for it. So that's as these are such as dependent, origination or the dependent arising. That's a very important thing, like in a very important part of Buddhist philosophy. I would like to just make you understand in one sentence. Now this particular theory says, or this particular philosophy says that everything that is happening is dependent on the other things. Matlab, it is the law of causation, right? That can be also called as the law of causation. Law of causation. This is something very important. While teaching history, I always use it. If anything is happening, it is not happening without any reason. Everything that happens, there is a reason behind it. So the same thing is used by Buddha long back somewhere in 6th century BC, and probably this is the reason because of what some scholars do call Buddha as the first rational philosopher in this world, because he had been talking about basically the law of causation, that is called as paticca samuppada. It's being written in different manners, right? But then it is paticca samuppada or patiya samupada. Of course Pali or Sanskrit or Hindi में थोड़ा फर्क होता है, तो जिसकी वजह से अलग अलग नाम लिखते हैं. But in Pali it's called as patiya samupada. In Hindi we always write it paticca samupada. That is the law of dependence, law of causation. क्योंकि इट कैन बी कनेक्टेड टू दैट कि दुनिया में दुख है और दुख के पीछे कुछ कारण है. दैट इज कॉल्ड एज पतिच्चा समुपादा. दैट्स वेरी कोर पार्ट ऑफ हिज फिलॉसफी दैट मेक्स बुद्धा एज ए वेरी रैशनल philosopher. Okay, fine. Apart from that, there are some other things that should be discussed here. That is called as Triratna. Now Buddhist Triratna or Buddhism is basically about this Triratna, which is composed of three things. What are these? Buddha, that's Sangha, Buddha himself, then Sangha is the monastery. That is that institution which is responsible for the further growth of Buddhism, and that's how Sangha is considered to be very important in Buddhism. And then finally it's Dhamma. What is Dhamma? The law or the philosophy which was uttered by him, the philosophy which was propounded by him, that's called as Dhamma. Okay. Then it comes to Panchsila. That is another important part. In Buddhist philosophy, that's called as Panchsila. What is Panchsila? Refrain from violence, right? Refrain from stealing, refrain from lying, refrain from taking intoxicating substances such as drugs and drinks, and refrain from the sexual misconduct. तो ये 5 चीजें हैं जिनको मिला के हम उनको पंचशिला कहते हैं. That is also one of the part. It is something very close to, let's say, eightfold path. तो उसी से close होके इसको develop किया गया. Okay. Now apart from this, whenever it comes to Buddhism, there are certain such questions which are very important, and sometimes they are being asked in the examination paper, but we do not focus on these kind of things, right? Let's understand these things also. First of all, neither accepted nor rejected the God. This is a bit complicated. Now when it comes to Buddhism, I must tell you when this question was asked to you that whether they believed in God or not, so outrightly I am telling you one thing, they have rejected the concept of Vedic gods and the Vedas, right? So they rejected the authority of Vedas and Vedic gods. This is how you need to know. Okay, fine. Since it rejected the authority of Vedas and Vedic gods, that's how Buddhist is also kept in the category of what? Gnostic philosophy, right? Any philosophy which is accepting the authority of Vedas and Vedic gods, they are falling in the category of what? They are falling in the category of Astic philosophy. That's how Aranyakas and Upanishads, though they had been rejecting the dominance of Brahmanism. They were in many occasions they were against the increasing dominance of Brahmanism, but yet they are falling in the Astic category. Why? Because they accepted the authority of Vedas and the Vedic gods. On the other hand, it rejected the concept of Vedas or authority of Vedas and Vedic gods. The second thing, then why did I write this particular sentence? Because when it comes to concept of God within Buddhism, so you all know that in later phase, Buddha himself, right? And apart from Buddha, the Bodhisattvas were considered as God, and that's how we can say that both the concepts are there. So you need to read the lines very carefully which are given in the statement, otherwise you can commit a mistake. Okay, advocated middle path, quite okay, did not believe in the permanence of the soul, right? Now this is another thing. Buddhism did not believe in the permanence of soul. Actually, there was nothing as such existing for them is called as soul, but they accepted the concept of rebirth. That is bit a dicey concept, right? So we do not have to think a lot about this right now. You just do the rectification, you cram it that Buddhism was rejecting soul but accepting rebirth, and they were giving quite logical argument also that how come it's possible. How come it's possible without the soul, right? Rebirth was possible without the soul. Emphasize on non-violence, rejected soul, Atman theory that we have already discussed, rejected the authority of Vedas. These are some core parts of Buddhist philosophy, and from where the questions are being asked, so that you need to keep in mind, okay? Now, some of the important symbols of Buddhism, such as his birth is being symbolized with what? Lotus and bull, remember it. Now later on you will find a greater impression of this over what? Over the Buddhist architecture. So whatsoever you talk about, like either you talk about Buddhist painting or Buddhist miniature, miniature sculpture, Buddhist stupas, chaityas or viharas, आप हर जगह पे लोटस और बुल के बहुत सारे इंप्रेशंस आपको देखने को मिलेंगे. So that's something which is related to birth. Even its impact could be noticed over Ashokan inscription, and it is believed that the inspiration was taken from Buddhism only, right? Then it comes to great departure, that's called as Mahabhinishkraman, and it is represented by a white horse. Enlightenment, that is Nirvana, that is represented by a Bodhi tree or a peepal tree. The first ceremony, that's called as Dharma Chakra Pravartan, and this is being symbolized by wheel. And you know the significance of this, that it has been it is something, there is a legacy of this we are still carrying, and the national flag is the most important example. And finally it comes to the death, that's called as Parinirvana, or it is symbolized by stupas, okay. Now next thing, okay. Now the next thing is pertaining to Buddhist scriptures. When it comes to Buddhist scriptures, if we'll go for a simplistic interpretation of Buddhist scriptures, it is divided into two parts, canonical and non-canonical, right? So there are two parts of Buddhist literature, that's called as canonical and non-canonical. Non-canonical. When it comes to canonical literature, this is that part of literature which is precisely dealing with Buddhism. They are not developed in the periphery of Buddhism. मतलब Buddhism की core philosophy के साथ अगर कोई literature बात करती है तो वो कौन सी है? Canonical literature. और canonical literature के अंदर जो है त्रिपिटकास आते हैं, और ये त्रिपिटकास में कौन कौन से? सूत्र पिटक, विनय पिटक and अभिधम्म पिटक. Now सूत्र पिटक is something which is dealing with basically what? The Buddha's teaching. So whatsoever philosophies were propounded by Buddha, that is precisely there in Sutra Pitak. What is there in Vinay Pitak? What is there in Vinay Pitak? In Vinay Pitak you can find the rules and regulations for the monastery, and Abhidhamma Pitak, these are the philosophical interpretation of Buddhism that got developed later on, right? Okay, so Sutra Pitak has been further divided into 5 branches. These are like Dig Nikai, Angutar Nikai, Sayukt Nikai, Majjhim Nikay and Khudak Nikay. Repeating it once again, Dig Nikay, Angutar Nikay, Majjhim Nikay, Sanyukt Nikay and Khudak Nikay. So these are 5 Nikayas, or like 5 branches of the Sutra Pitak. Okay, fine. Let's move further. Apart from this, there are so many other literature which are falling in the category of Buddhist literature, but in which category? A non-canonical literature, right? So when it comes to non-canonical literature, among them some of the important books are Dhammapadas, a collection of important religious and moral sayings, that's called as Dhammapadas. Then it comes to Theragati. Now what is Theragati? Basically it's a collection of religious poems by the Bhikkhunis. Okay, fine. So Thergatha, in the Theragathis and Theragathas, it is for the monks, and Thergati is for the Bhikkhunis. Then there is Jatka. Jatkas are basically the stories of the previous birth. How many previous birth? 547 previous birth of Gautam Buddha, and they are compiled. They are compiled undoubtedly much later, and they are compiled in Pali language. Okay. These are all there in Pali language. Then it comes to Buddha Vamsa. It contains the legends of verses about 24 Buddha preceding Gautam Buddha. Then it comes to Ceylonese chronicles. What is Ceylonese chronicle? Once Buddhism is reaching to Sri Lanka, then good number of texts were even being written in Sri Lanka. These are called as either in Singli tradition or Ceylonese tradition. Among them, some important books are Deepavamsa, Mahavamsa, like Silambamsa. These are some of the important writings there in Sri Lanka, and in fact these are considered to be a very good source to know not only about Buddhism but even about Mauryan Empire, precisely Asoka. Okay. Then Milindapanna, it's a very important text. This is basically the question of Milin. It's a dialogue between the Indo-Greek king Menander and the Buddhist monk Nagasena, and it is written in Sanskrit. Keep in mind, it is written in Sanskrit. So gradually Buddhist literature is converting into what? Converting into, or they are being written in Sanskrit. Now here onwards the books are mostly written in Sanskrit. Lalit Vistara, that's the biography of a Sanskrit text, deals with the biography of Buddha. Again I am repeating, Lalit Vistara, that's a biography of Buddha written in Sanskrit. Then is Divyadana, means divine tales, right? It contains the anthologies of 38 stories, and it is again a Sanskrit text which is also dealing with the Mauryan and the Sunga history. Then it comes to Asoka Vadan, it is dealing with the legends of Asoka. Then Buddha Charit, it's written by Ashwaghosh, again is Sanskrit text. Then it comes to Sariputra Prakaran, that's again written by Ashwaghosh, and it deals with the character called as Sariputra, right? And then finally it's Mahabhibha Sutra, that is again a Sanskrit work like on Buddha, attributes to Buddha, also deals with Sankhya and Vaiseshik philosophies are the principles. These are two Brahminical philosophies, Vedantic, not precisely Vedantic, Brahminical philosophies, right? Sankhya and Vaiseshika. So this Mahabhibhasa Sutra is even dealing with these important Brahminical philosophies. Okay. Now there is another thing which is very important in Buddhist, in Buddhism, that's about the Buddhist council. So let's discuss about them also. So when it comes to Buddhist council, the first Buddhist council, that is considered to be the Buddhist council which took place immediately after the death of Buddha, 486. In couple of places it is written 483 BC also, right? The patronage was provided by Ajatasattu, presided by Mahakasap, and Upali also played very important role. But if question is being asked, who was presiding it? Mahakasap. The place was Rajgiri, and what is the greatest achievement of this? The compilation of Sutta Pitka and Vinay Pitka. Now you don't get confused, sometimes in certain books it is being written that Vinay Pitka even got compiled in the second Buddhist council also. Let me tell you one thing very categorically, that Buddhist councils were being held again and again for this reason, that in Buddhism certain problems, certain conflicts were coming. In order to resolve these problems and conflicts, ultimately the Buddhist councils were being held, and that's why Vinay Pitka is one text which is being rewritten again and again, and that's why you will find the rewriting of Vinay Pitka in most of the Buddhist councils, because the concepts were changing. The second council exactly after 100 years, right? So 383, if you consider it 483, in that case it is 383, और इसको 486 काउंट करते हैं तो फिर तो ये 103 साल के बाद ये होता है, ठीक है? Patronized by Kalasok, right? And the person who presided it Sarvakamini, ठीक है? The place was Vaisali, and here you can find a very important change, that is the division of Sanghas into Theravadins and Mahasangiks, right? So Theravadins, it's also called as Thavirvadins, or let's say Mahasangiks, okay? The third council, in 250 BC, is historicity is bit doubtful, but it is largely it's being assumed by the historians it happened in the 250 BC. Who patronized it? It was Asoka, and the person who was presiding it was Mugliput Tissa, who is considered to be very close to Asoka, and in fact he was a dear friend to Asoka, and he presided it. The place was Patliputra. Here you can find the compilation of Abhidhamma Pitka, and that was the philosophical interpretation of what? Buddhism. And then it comes to the fourth Buddhist council, 1st century AD, somewhere around 78 AD, and that was patronized by Kanishka. The chairperson was Vasumitra. Ashwaghosh has also played a very significant role here. Kashmir, the place was Kundalban, and the division into Mahayana and Hinayana. So Buddhism got again divided into two branches, that's called as Hinayana and Mahayana, and these two are the most popular forms of Buddhism. Okay, so now here onwards we are going to discuss about the various sects of Buddhism, because there were so many questions are being asked from the sects. We are also going to discuss about the various monasteries of Buddhism, the various educational centers of Buddhism, and all these things, but they will be discussed in the second part of the lecture. So keep on following us for the second part. Thank you.